or fruit rot just cause our black raspberry plantings to die out in Oregon. Really, you know, if you're really lucky if you get a third-year harvest. So everybody's on a really planting a lot of plants constantly. And so we're really trying to get durability, and we have found aphid resistance through Michael Dossett's PhD work, and we're trying to incorporate that into selection so at least we can start to move the virus pressure out of the equation as the virus is transmitted by aphids. So we do have a lot of selections that are available if you're doing any black raspberries. You know, we have some of these that are available at the nurseries right now. They all tend to machine harvest pretty well. All of our data is machine harvest collected by Litow harvesters. So if you see a yield data from us, that's what it's coming from. We're probably going to release this one. It's not, the challenge with it is it's a fresh market thing. It's really late. If you think Mac Black's late, this is as late as Mac Black, but larger and better yields. So there's not a huge demand for that. So that's why it hasn't been pushed along a little more quickly, but it's a beautiful berry, nice, vigorous plant with great fruit quality. Then this is a question for the crowd, for anybody who grows black raspberries. We have one that's a nice thornless black raspberry, this 4179-1. But if you look at the top right, it looks pretty much like a black raspberry. If you look at the bottom right, you can see that it got its thornlessness from red raspberry a couple generations back. And when you cross a red raspberry and a black raspberry, you get a purple raspberry, and then you keep crossing it back to the black raspberry to try to get the black. But the question is that black enough to pass as a black raspberry? Because if it is, 4179 has some tremendous potential as a thornless. And if it's got the same anthocyanins, if you puree it as Munger, and those sorts of things, is it okay? Any thoughts? If the flavor, you know, that's what you got to do. I mean, we'll have to decide. But I mean, I guess sort of the question is, can we get past that color? Because if it's thornless and has good flavor and good anthocyanins when juiced or pureed and a machine harvest, any reason not to push it forward? I had tended to push towards discarding it because it was a little too purple, but you know, it's thornless. And that's important to some people. Right. No, that would be my take too. But when we put it out for people, they tend to have a hard time getting past the initial color. But I think it'll be puree, it'll be fine. Okay. We do have some of these selections out in grower trials currently. Almost all of them are better than Munger at some level. It's still, anybody who's come to our cuttings, like we did our black raspberries last week. I think Hankoop came down, and you know, the Peerbolt group, actually you weren't there this year, but nothing like putting a group of about 100 selections of black raspberries in front of people to see their eyes glaze over. I mean, black raspberries just don't taste that much different. They're not that much different in size. And so trying to find things that are a clear improvement over Munger are hard. And so what we're coming down to is make sure it's not a discard, because some do have off flavors, and then just go on yield, machine harvest yield. So we should have some good things coming out, and then as we move the aphid resistance in here, it'll get even better. As far as blackberries, you know, we obviously have a pretty substantial blackberry program. We're doing a lot of crosses, a lot of seedlings. One of the good and bad things right now about our blackberry program is Columbia Star is such a fantastic fruit quality that it makes it really easy to discard things, because you know, it's set the bar pretty high. But we do have some nice new named things, or things that are coming along that are available at the nursery. And the other thing that I'll talk about a little bit is we have some things that are semi-erect kind of blackberries. And when we talk about that, that's comparing things to Chester, Loch Ness, that kind of blackberry, or even some of the Arkansas materials. And then we're going to probably name our first Primocane fruiting blackberry, which I don't know how that's going to do up here, because you guys are kind of cool in the summer, and getting it to ripen in a significant amount of the crop is hard. So these figures aren't available. I usually present these figures. They aren't available this year, but I don't think the pictures change that much. In Oregon, the big deal is it's pretty much Black Diamond and Columbia Star. Everybody wants Columbia Star to yield like Black Diamond. Then it's a trailing off to lots of much smaller acreages, and very little Marion being planted anymore. It's just There's still a lot in the fields, but it's not being planted. I didn't know where to put this slide in, but we really rely on Pat Moore and Wendy to test for root rot tolerance. I happened to put this in the blackberries because we were having some problems on a couple locations with Columbia Star going out with root rot, and we usually don't think of root rot as being a blackberry problem. And so we wanted to examine it more closely. We put all of our selections at Puyallup, and they all came to, so far, it's still just the second year of evaluation. It's too early to really tell. We'll really know next year, but they all have done pretty well under that situation. Then we see we have a range of both black raspberries and red raspberries, from things that take root rot very well to things that do not. I will note that one of the early ones that I talked about earlier, red raspberries, is down on the right-hand end, meaning it's susceptible to root rot. What we've seen in Columbia Star, for those who've tried it up here on wetter sites, is the site south of the station near Salem, Oregon, where they've got a clay layer down a couple feet. And it's a group of growers in one area that have just had terrible problems with root rot. But it was also after the year we got 66 inches of rain in the winter, which was, what, 2 years ago? And I'm not saying the problem's gone away, but I did not hear nearly as much talk about it. So it may have just been this unusual combination of a clay layer combined with a ton of rain in a given year. As far as newer ones, Columbia Sunrise is a very early ripening one. David Mutz had this on his farm. It came through, I think, the best of the trailing blackberries he tried last year. It was just a young planting, but it came through better than Columbia Star. I think it and Hall's Beauty, which I'll talk about in a second, are about the same. Certainly those winds can get it. Probably too early to really evaluate it because it's just a baby crop, but it did seem to come through better than the rest. Very early ripening. The reason this one is of interest is if you have a farmer's market or sales, or you want to spread out so you're beating the SWD pressure. This is coming in, you know, this is almost strawberry season. This is sort of ripening with totem kind of thing. And so if you can beat the SWD pressure, or at least reduce your number of sprays, this would be a plus. Does have some problems with, on some sites, instead of just the primary buds breaking, we get the tertiary and secondary and tertiary buds breaking. And when that happens, first year one grower had some out there, he was getting fruiting on the tertiary a month after he should have gotten it. And when that happens, those were not machine harvestable. They just stuck on the plant. We think the problem was excessive fertilizer late in the season causing that, but we're not sure. Hall's Beauty is a really nice one because you can use it for machine harvesting, processing, as well. It's really nice for farmers market sales. And we've had at least a few acres planted right along a river, and it gets flooded every year. And we've never seen any root rot problems with Hall's Beauty. It is a little bit earlier than Columbia Star and Marion, but probably not typically as early as Columbia Sunrise, although it can be pretty early. Consistently, whether frozen or fresh, people think it tastes really sweet. And I think it's not that the sugars are so much higher, but I think the acids are a little bit lower in it. It's also a great ornamental. I didn't put that picture in today. And you guys aren't into growing flowers. That's not why you grow them. But I will tell you, this thing has double or triple flower petals, and the flowers are, I mean, they're like this big. They are just monstrous. So if you want to plant something beautiful in your backyard, go for it. This is one we're trying to get into grower trials. It's one of the higher yielding ones we've ever had as a trailer, but the size and skin toughness is similar to Marion, which is not a compliment. And so we're pushing forward with it slowly, but we're trying to get in grower fields. And you'll see in the center picture, I guess I can point. This is a picture, I think, from Enfields. And we do sometimes get some uneven set. I think it's due to poor weather conditions during flowering. And I think maybe because there's a little more cold or wet during that period, you can see that some of those berries are kind of poorly set. So whether that's going to be a consistent problem or whether it's going to be like the top right all the time, we'll have to see. For somebody who's got something wants something unusual, we have this 4024-3. It could be a machine harvestable Tay-type blackberry. If anybody, I know there's a demand for about 30 acres of that in the entire Pacific Northwest, but if you happen to have one of those 30 acres, this is one to look at. Switching now to the semi-erect blackberries. This is the Triple Crown Chester, Loch Ness kind of thing. We have two that are really early ripening, and these are Loch Ness or earlier. Galaxy is one of them. It's 3/4 Western blackberry, or excuse me, Eastern blackberry and 1/4 Western blackberry. So it's ripening. We usually compare things to Triple Crown because nobody down in our area really grows Loch Ness anymore. But it's early ripening, a good berry. It's a little bit more uneven in berry size, but it's got good firmness. So it's a good one for farmers market, roadside stands, that kind of thing. So you would be planting this to complement or replace Loch Ness. Here's an example of it. After I think 7 and 14 days of harvest storage on the right, that's comparing Galaxy on the left and Eclipse, which I'll talk about in a second, on the right. They both seem to hold up pretty well in clamshell storage. Eclipse is a hair earlier than Galaxy. We originally thought this was a cross, that this was also 1/4 Western blackberry, but it turns out when we did the genetic analysis, when we released it, its parents weren't what we thought they were. And so it's actually all Eastern blackberry, very early ripening. It's very uniform, medium-sized, firm berry, earlier than Triple Crown. Once again, this is one that if you're looking for a complement or replacement to Loch Ness season, even as early as Loch Tay, if anybody's grown Loch Tay, this would be a good option. Same pictures before, it held up very well in clamshell type storage. Just comparisons of Eclipse to Chester and Triple Crown. In general, less fruit defects. Eclipse probably certainly isn't as big as Triple Crown. It is as big as Chester, but you don't see as many. It's not that it won't get UV damage on the fruit, but it's less common. Our newer release, Twilight, is right on top of Triple Crown, but much firmer than Triple Crown. This is what I would replace Triple Crown. I would look at replacing your Triple Crown with this. This one, Triple Crown's hard to beat for flavor and sweetness, but this one is so much firmer, and it's got that nice, seems like consumers like a pop, whether it's in blueberries or in blackberries, that sort of textural quality, and this one has that nice kind of pop. It is, even though it's very firm and crisp, it will get UV damage when the temperatures shoot up to above 90 after being relatively moderate. Examples of it, their top right is 21 days of storage. Not that anybody would ever go that long, but gives you an example of Twilight versus Chester. Twilight versus Triple Crown on the left, and then some more Twilight versus Chester down below. Once again, fewer defects than the Chester and Triple Crown for us. This is the one we're going to release. It may take a little while to get out, but this 499-2 is a Primocane fruiting blackberry. This is only of interest if you're going to probably put tunnels up. Even in Oregon, where we get more heat than you guys do, this is something that starts ripening in August and probably could go to Thanksgiving if you wanted it to. This one's large, high yielding. For us, it's just much nicer plant than Primark 45, which is the sort of the standard for the industry right now. It's bigger and earlier. Not sure how much earlier, because when it's had a full crop on it, I'd say it's been about 5 to 7 days earlier. The year before, when we didn't have a full crop, it was a couple weeks earlier. But our yields have been much higher than Primary 45, even though the control and the planting these went into for Primary 45 were poorly growing plants. So we're actually comparing it to a year older plants, and this one still does a lot better than Primary 45 for yield. Here's pictures of the fruit, good size, firm, attractive. Doesn't tend to have the real bitter flavors that sometimes you can get in the Primocane fruiters. Some storage, 7 days in storage versus Primark 45, and then over 3 weeks, they're both holding up pretty well. Probably more fruit defects in the Primark 45, but this is coming out of largely the same genetics, so I wouldn't be surprised to see some of the same, reversion problems that you can get in Primark 45. Strawberry, same sort of thing. Now look over, if you're going to go look for trialing some of our selections, you're going to talk to Lassen or NorCal. We're still doing a lot of strawberry crosses. We aren't doing many day neutral crosses. We sort of stopped doing those. We've had some releases that there's been a lot of plants out, but it's uneven. Availability has been uneven on these. What's being planted, this is also old data, but You know, it's been mostly Tillamook, Hood, and Albion. The supposedly Haagen-Dazs Japan is going to start buying Puget Crimson, and so I imagine Puget Crimson numbers will go up in the next couple of years if that works out. We'll see. Sweet Sunrise, I won't go into great detail on these. I know Sweet Sunrise has looked very good for people as far as yield. Fruit size, fruit quality has a little bit of buttoning problems sometimes when cool, wet flowering conditions. Technically, I mean, statistically, it's always as big as Tillamook, making it easy to pick. But you go out and look at the plants in the field, and the fruit are not as big as Tillamook. But I don't know if they're just heavier, you know, more dense berry, so they weigh more. I'm not exactly sure why, but it's been pretty consistent that statistically the fruit are as big as Tillamook. But when you look into the field, it's more Tillamook's still pretty big. Charm, which has been harder to get, and it's like sometimes Lassen has them, sometimes NorCal Planasa has them. Charm has been really highly desirable by pick your own, not pick your own so much, roadside market people and farmers market. For them, they get very large, tasty berries and very high yields. The other one that's the newest release is Mary's Peak. This one is being tested pretty substantially right now. We'll see how it comes out the other side. Beautiful plant, beautiful fruit. It's just a matter of, is it going to yield enough to displace Tillamook? People like the flavor of Mary's Peak. I did like the slide that Joe Peterson, who was working for Pure Bolt, took at one of our roadside markets. Mary's Peak, replacing Hoods for us. So there is a perception that it has really good flavor. I don't think it's as good as Hood. It doesn't have as much acid, but it's a really good berry. As far as grower trials, we have a few selections that are out right now in grower trial, and we'll just see. But if you have an interest in, these are 2486 is going to be primarily a processed berry first, but I'm sure it'd work in fresh. 2678-1 is probably one of the best flavored strawberries we've had, and maybe it's because that Puget Summer parent. But it can be a little bit hard to cap, and you can see it's not, it may not, well, you can't see there, but it may not be dark enough for processing. We'll see. And then 309-1, that's one that's a little bit further behind. As far as blueberries, because one of the things the Blueberry Commission asks of us is to present sort of results of some of the work, and we do that in our October meeting, but I'll give some of the high points of what the Blueberry Commission funded. Basically, they were helping funding our breeding program, but they wanted us, as did the Oregon Blueberry Commission, to focus on something that was important. And so for the last 5 years, we've focused on blueberry shock virus, as well as the regular breeding objectives. And what we know about shock is, you know, Bristow here at WSU and Bob Martin, when he was actually with Ag Canada before he moved to the USDA, did a lot of the initial work on shock. We know it's pollen transmitted. We've always said it does not reoccur, although there's now some discussion about how you're getting a reoccurrence of shock. The question is trying to determine there's no such thing as immune. Everything will get it if you do the classic plant pathologist, graft one plant onto the other. But there are some things that are much slower to get it, and that's what I'll talk about. One of the challenges, though, is that, you know, in some variety, we've had cases where blue gold takes 3 years to get it, and other places where it's taken 10 years to get it. So how do you rate that as good or bad? And so these are some of the challenges. When we first, you guys know what shock looks like. When we first went out there to start this work, we asked growers, and this is a list of what they thought was high, medium, low, or very low susceptibility. About the time they got this list together and we started these studies, everybody figured out Draper was not slow to get it. It got it plenty fast. But the rest of these have held up pretty well. I have a handout that I mistakenly put out in the other room. This just shows trying to get how do you visualize how quickly or slowly something gets in. So what we've done here is, for the whole length of time that something has been out, the blue part represents how many years it did not get shock and how many years it did. It's looking at all the plants we tested, all the tests. So like the second one down, Legacy, it's been really 28 years. But really what it is one plant has gotten shock. None of the rest have ever gotten shock. So it's been almost 30 years without shock. But then you have things like Early Blue and Cargo that are extremely susceptible to shock. And so we have figured that out, and this data will be useful, and it's been presented to both commissions in Oregon and Washington. As you're making decisions on planning things, you can have some idea of how quickly things get it. But even in here, you know, you start looking at the right-hand column, and you get down there, and we've had Calypso in for 5 years without shock. Is that meaningful, or is that way too short a time to determine whether it's slow to get it? Another way of looking at it was to just sort of compare how many years negative it was for shock and how many years it was positive. And the ones that are in green there, you know, are ones that were pretty slow to get it or have yet to get it. But you do have some conflicts in there. If you look at the Liberty, some of the Liberty got it relatively quick and others did not at all. But you can say that there are a group of things, selections that are slow to get it. No reason to go through this, but we have a lot of selections that have variable tolerance, but still you don't want to keep a selection around for 10 years just to determine whether it gets shock or not. But we do have, you know, Mini Blues, Blue Crop, Calypso, Darrow, Legacy, Rika, and Toro really are very slow to get shock or don't get it at all. We have a number of selections the same way. And then we have that group down there that most of you are familiar with that get it very quickly, sometimes so quickly that it can really damage the plant for the life of the plant. Things like Blue Gold, if they get it the first time they flower, never seem to recover, even though they're supposed to. So there is a range of these, and with this knowledge we now have, we're making decisions on how to make crosses, but we're not going to be able to wait 10 years on these to see how fast they get it. So we need to figure out, we have a mapping population that is now starting to get blueberry shock. It's been out there for, I think, 15 or 20 years. Had a few positives in 2018 and many more in 2019. Our hope is that this is the perfect kind of thing to get a genetic marker for, whereas if we can identify something that's characteristic that means they're slow to get blueberry shock, we could test all of our selections and determine very early on whether we think it's likely to get it or not get it. But it's been till just recently that these plants have gotten infected, so it's going to be interesting to see. The rest of the breeding program, it's the same thing. That, you know, we're putting out a lot of seedlings, making a few selections, and, you know, we basically making 60 or so selections every year, 50 to 60 selections, and working them down through the process to grower trial. We did put in a brand new planting. I don't know when the last time some of you were down. We had a beautiful planting under the net that Bernadine Strick established in 1990, or maybe even 1990. But we had replanted for years and years and years. And if you look at that net picture in the top left, you can see troughs where we've dug plants out and put new plants in. And that proved to be, we kept going on that field for 2 plantings too long. And so the plants were not growing well. We just established a new trial lower right, and that was just actually planted, that was a year after, the fall after planting. Things are growing really well in that. And so we're really excited about this new field, and we're gonna have we've already made some decisions on things in there that are going to go into grower trials. As far as things that are available right now for grower trials, 235-3, just got a call. You know, I know that Fall Creek has had some. I know that Oregon Blueberry has some, and I also know that JRT has some plants of this one. Very firm, great flavor, high yields. It's fantastic quality. The question is going to all be about hardiness, which is just, you can't see through the little ghost icons in the bottom left, but it's got a significant amount of southeastern U.S. background, so I would not want to plant acres of it up here. I'd want to plant a row of it up here. It seems like it'll do very well. We have 2 of these 114s that could be available. These are out of a Blue Crop and Aurora background, so not surprising, they're very late. They seem to have good enough firmness and certainly much better flavor than the Aurora parent. They're in sort of that Liberty season for those who are interested in it, in that kind of season, and they've also been slow to get shock. Once again, if you're interested in those kind of season, filling that kind of season, let us know. 264-1 is the one I've been most excited about for a while. It's a Liberty season with much larger, with larger berries and better quality. Haven't seen any problems with the softness that Liberty will get. The main concern I have with this one is it tends to be, I think, I don't know if it's a Fall Creek term, it tends to be bony plant, which means you're going to have to do some to keep getting rejuvenated plantings, you're going to have to prune it appropriately to encourage that kind of growth, encourage new growth. But it really looks good. You know, it's firm enough is what needs to be tested, but it seems to be fine. 169-1, we hope the clusters aren't too tight on this, but it's got Liberty as a parent. Haven't seen any of the softness you'll get sometimes with Liberty. Two things everybody's afraid about right now. If they use Liberty as a parent, is that thing going to show up as soft in a few years? And if you use Draper as a parent, are you going to have Draper drop 6 or 7 years after you push something out the door? But this one is a little bit after Cargo, a little bit before Calypso, and Last Call. Excellent fruit quality and had outstanding yield for us. Nobody up here is going to grow a rabbit eye, but if anybody's visiting from, I doubt anybody's going to grow a rabbit eye up here, but if anybody's visiting from Oregon, this is the one that we have sort of narrowed it down to, is a very large fruited, high yielding rabbit eye blueberry, obviously for the very late season, which is a good thing in Oregon, but maybe too late up here. We do have a series that we're moving to grower trials, meaning, for instance, Oregon Blueberry Farm hopes to have 620-2 and 587-1 available in the fall. Those are two that have so beautiful. I can't tell you how good the quality and the season are. And so we're really pushing those through quickly. Mini Blues is out there. Bernardine Strick has done some amazing work. If you come down to a field day to see, the whole goal on a Mini Blues is you have a small berry, and Bernardine's work has been to try to figure out how you can, as quickly as possible, get a plant to machine harvestable size, because you're never going to hand harvest this thing. This is something you would grow if you're competing with Lobush industry, if you've got a bakery market, if you are contracting with somebody who wants small berries, yogurt or whoever. This is a great flavored blueberry, high yielding blueberry, machine harvestable blueberry. Really the only challenge is that you're stuck with it as a small fruited blueberry. You can't make it big if the market changes. I'll mention Echo just because it's the next slide that's important, but Echo was an ornamental we released a couple years ago that flowers in the spring and then flowers and fruits again in August, September. So it's fruiting. People who are not raspberry growers like to call it Primocane fruiting on current season's growth. So we've continued to do crosses with this kind of material, and this kind of thing starts to get pretty interesting. This is out in the mid-September this year. This thing had fruited earlier in the spring, and now it's coming back with a fall crop. You can start to think about how you might change your management strategies. If you could just cut it and get new growth and get flowers and fruit off that. I'm not saying that's where we're at yet, but that's where you might be going with that. You could really reduce costs. And it's just, as you can see, that's my hand. That's not some small person's hands. Those are big berries. Still a little soft, probably tear too much, but it's something to pay attention to and see if we can work this into better cultivars. Blueberries, as I said, I'm repeating again, we have a number of nurseries that have these plants clean. Call them if you want to try these things. Call us and we'll refer you to them. We'd love to get some of these things out into test around the Northwest. The other thing that for those of you who are involved with the commissions that I'll just mention real briefly is we do have a trial that we put in for a grant to the Blueberry Commission. It's pretty substantial. We put it to both of them. We crossed heat susceptible and heat resistant varieties. We put all the seedlings from those crosses in Roseburg, Oregon, Prosser, Washington, Linden, Washington, and Corvallis. And the goal is to see if we can develop a better understanding of heat tolerance and how to breed for it. So here are the sites. The site in Linden is top right. That was a picture taken. So it went in last fall, and they're all coming along very nicely. But we're going to work to try to see if we can figure out this heat tolerance thing. With that, I am done. Be happy to answer any questions, and I'll be around for a little while to answer them after the sessions. But any quick questions? Yes, sir, Tom. That has a nice ring to it.
So do you think that 4999-2 might work in central Washington without tunnels?
I think it's definitely worth trying, yeah. Yeah, I guess the only thing is that I don't understand about central Washington is one of the reasons that the Primocane fruiters do not do well in Arkansas where they were developed is if it's really hot when they're flowering, they set poorly. So I'm not exactly sure when the flowering time would be in central Washington, and it may not be as hot as Arkansas. But that would be the concern, is that the flowers get fried and don't set well. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Oh, come.
Is the Primocane fruit thornless or thorny?
Thorny. The other's coming, but it's always like, you know, we've made all those crosses and now we're selecting thornless ones, but it's just always a generation behind. And it'll be interesting to see. I mean, you know, it's been interesting to watch the arc of Primark 45. They released Primark Traveler after that, and Primark Freedom, both of which are, well, one of which is thornless, and now they've gone back to Primark 45. So it's still mostly a thorny market for the Primocane fruiters. Any other questions? Thank you very much for your attention.
Awesome. Thanks, Chad.